Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Your Views on the News, a special edition looking at the extradition cases that have taken place in the last few weeks. We've come to the final segment of our programme for this evening, and I'm pleased to say in the studio joining me is Jeremy Corbyn MP. Good evening. Good evening. And also Peter Oborne, Chief Political Correspondent from the Telegraph. Good evening. Thank you both for joining me. Just earlier we were discussing about the extradition treaty itself. And Peter, if I can ask you first, one of the messages that's come throughout our programming this evening is that, you know, this is double standards. One rule for Muslims, another rule for non-Muslims. And that even to the extent that, you know, some newspapers, they saw it fit to campaign for certain individuals, but not others, even calling some of the others unwelcome guests. This does smell of and smack of Islamophobia, it feels.
So what I think we need, without accepting everything you have just said, I do think that we need to have an explanation about why the review of the US extradition treaty was announced just a few days after the 5 Muslims were sent to the United States of America. Because on the face of things, I mean, Gary McKinnon had a very strong case. I was delighted that he was kept in this country. But it is very worrying that 5 Muslims were sent just a few days before that. And so, yes, I do think the government needs to explain to Muslims and to the rest of us who care about justice and fair play concept.
Well, the government's response was that, you know, it's due process. Each case has its own merits.
Well, there are so many similarities between the cases. I mean, the defences concerning Asperger's, for instance, in one of the 5 Muslims, you know, I need to be convinced of that. And also it has to be said that the Home Secretary has a poor record already in this regard. Think of the way in which the control order was slapped on Raed Saleh, for instance, a very distinguished, brilliant in many ways, Israeli-Palestinian politician. I mean, it was outrageous that he was held by the Home Secretary here for several months.
And Jeremy, in terms of this extradition itself, it does seem like it's finally going to reflect our kind of national interests, if you like, in the sense that judges may be, once primary legislation is changed, judges will be able to decide if the case should be heard here, if the crime's been committed.
Well, Peter's made a very important point that in making the decision she did on Gary McKinnon, the Home Secretary has set a new threshold and a new bar and included Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights and allowed herself to take medical considerations into account. And I'm pleased she's done that, and I'm pleased that Gary McKinnon is not going to be sent to the United States. Absolutely. Because I think there was no justification whatsoever. But 5 days before, 5 Muslims were removed, 2 of whom, Babar Ahmad and Talha Ahsan, had no process against them at any stage in any British court, but had been detained in British prisons. One has Asperger's syndrome. Both had been very badly treated. Gary McKinnon was paid £60,000 in compensation by the Met Police for his ill treatment, and they have been removed to the United States. Now, the question, which I asked the Home Secretary in Parliament, was why these had been removed to the United States. You can't say deported because they hadn't been there. Removed to the United States when there was no case against them, and she said they are different issues and different cases. Well, the 5 are different cases. They're 5 different cases, and the way in which the media conflated the whole thing into Abu Hamza and 4 others, whereas in reality they're different cases. Completely different cases.
Yeah, this is, and we have got callers online, and I will come to you, callers. Just bear with me 1 minute. But I do want to pick up on this point. Talha's father, we had him on at the beginning of the show. He referred to the way the media handled this as the Abu Hamza gang. Abu Hamza and the gang. You know, it was almost like the way the media portrayed it was Abu Hamza and the rest. Whereas the cases are so fundamentally different with Babar Ahmad and Talha Ahsan. Why do you think, Peter, that media did lump it together? And even the Home Secretary mentioned it. She answered a specific question, quoting Abu Hamza and the others, when the question was...
That was my question.
Yeah, your question.
She answered it exactly that way. Yeah. Sorry, Peter.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm learning an awful lot from listening to both of you, actually. And why I hate... It's a very difficult question, that, the why, because it means going into motive. But it is, you can say that it's lazy reporting, and you can also say, and this is the surmise, I don't want to say it firmly, but is there an element of Muslims are somehow different to other people about this, that we just lump them, Muslims, together as Muslims, and whereas a white suspect, Gary McKinnon, gets treated in a different way. I think it's a very, because going back to what I was saying earlier, I do think that it is fantastically important to get this straight. I think that that the Home Secretary has been getting popularity on the right wing of the Conservative Party and in the right wing press. She does it partly by looking tough on law and order, but she has an overriding duty to make sure that the rule of law applies in this country. That's what we need to have. And I'm not clear at all that while the rule of law has certainly applied at last, far too late in the case of Gary McKinnon, that due process, proper due process and fairness was treated to the other people, 5 others, all, as Jeremy Corbyn and brilliantly pointing out, separate cases, who didn't receive it, don't appear to have received due process, and are now in the United States, and it's very hard to see how they ever come back. Okay.
Well, let me just take a couple of callers, maybe even just one, and come back to you. And hopefully we will have David Bermingham on the phone as well. I believe Muhammad is on the line. Assalamu alaikum, Muhammad.
Alaikum salam.
You're on air. Your views, please.
Everyone's asking why Babar and Talha has been treated differently to Gary McKinnon, and probably Richard as well soon. It's so obvious that it's because they're Muslim, and secondly, it's so infuriating that this has happened. I feel seriously to renounce my citizenship. This is because what is the difference between Talha and Babar and Gary McKinnon? Really, what is the difference? It's just that the 2 are Muslim and 1 is not. It's so infuriating.
Okay. Well, thank you for your views there, Mohammed. Let's take another caller, I believe a sister from Surrey. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
You're on air. Your views, please.
I think I'd just like to echo really I feel very outraged by this as well. As a British Muslim and up till now very proud British subject, I feel very much betrayed by the system. I feel sort of what's happened, particularly after the Home Secretary intervened in the extradition of Gary McKinnon. Rightfully, I think that was the right thing to do for Gary McKinnon, actually anyone in that situation. The fact that she failed to see the human rights of Talha, Ahsan in particular, and Babar Ahmad going into solitary confinement over 23 hours a day with only 1 day reprieve, and the fact that they're not vulnerable, having been incarcerated for 6 to 8 years with no sign of when they're going to be tried, I found outrageous, and it's frank institutional racism. I really am grateful to Peter Oborne and Jeremy Corbyn and Andy Slaughter for being here today and actually portraying an alternative political opinion and journalistic opinion. But I think it's got to be born, I think really the message I wanted to get across to whoever's listening is this is going to turn into a Muslim electoral issue. People who are going to vote in the next general election are going to support that politician that stands up for these people's rights.
Okay, thank you very much for your views. I think, it does capture the kind of callers that we have been getting. The people are feeling outraged, people feeling betrayed, they're feeling their citizenship isn't worth the paper it's written on. No, actually, every single caller has said they were very happy for Gary and his family. I think it's the right decision.
The thing is, all 3, Gary, Babar and Talha, all said, if there's a case against me in the UK, prosecute. And the Home Secretary has now said Gary will not be removed to the United States, and the Attorney General and DPP are considering whether or not to prosecute him. I would think there's very little likelihood of him being prosecuted, and he will probably, maybe under some kind of restriction, but probably be allowed to go free. Now, I'm not an expert on US law, and as I understand it, in the federal federal court that Babar and Talha have now been charged in the USA, it would be an absolutely legitimate defence to say that they should not have been brought into US jurisdiction because of the new policy being adopted by the British government on this. Now, the British government is saying that there's now this medical threshold on removal, and it's the first time I can recall for a very long time the British government has actually challenged what I believe to be a completely abusive extradition arrangement between the United States and Britain. Now, if somebody, a British citizen, goes to the USA, commits a crime and flees, then the US would be perfectly within its rights to seek extradition of that person from the US, from the British jurisdiction to the US to face a charge. No question.
That's right.
And the same thing would apply the other way around. But the idea that a crime has been committed because of the use of a computer, the host server of which was in the United States, and the claim is that inappropriate things were done on this website. If there is a crime committed, then the laws on terrorism between Britain and the USA are actually broadly similar. But there's been no charge made in the UK against either of them. And that's the key point, surely.
Yeah. Okay, Peter?
No, this is absolutely right. The failure to be proud of the British legal system, which I'm very proud of. And so if charges are made against British citizens for crimes committed in Britain, it should, as a matter of course, be the case that we get charged, the suspects get charged in Britain. And it's now 2 or 3 consecutive governments which have been basically somehow cowed by America or feel that they somehow are controlled by America. And do you know, I'm proud of British justice. And I believe that it should apply to all British citizens. And of course there are cases where one should extradite, but it doesn't look as if some of these are such cases.
Well, let's take another caller, Rabat from London. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, Rabat. Assalamu alaikum. Okay. Hello.
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
This is Abdul Razak.
Abdul Razak, okay.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Now, see, what I would like to say about this issue of Abu Hamza is that, I mean, we have to realize that this problem is caused by Abu Hamza and Hamza alone, because the statement that he made preaching about people. Now, when he had said it into the hands of racist people who are now using that and calling for his execution wherever he may be. Now, he has created problems not only to himself and other poor, but to all Muslims. See, they now see that statement as being very, very important. Now, there is nowhere you will make this sort of statement and people will look at it very, very lightly. Look at what is now we are saying that there is a double standard. There will be a double standard. I will play the same double standard, because if Abu Hamza cannot use his knowledge of Islam and be wise with it in his preaching, then it's going to create problems for the whole world.
Okay. Abdul Razak, I've got your point. Thank you very much, and we are running out of time, and I'll come back to the panel to ask this, but I do want to go to David Bermingham, who's joined us online. Good evening, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you for joining us. Now, David, we've been talking about this whole extradition issue for nearly 2 hours. The overwhelming feeling that a lot of people are finding that it was double standards, hypocritical, people feeling outraged. It seems some people are more worthy of their human rights than others. I mean, briefly, you wrote eloquently in the Times about this, but briefly, just your reaction. I mean, how did you feel when you heard the news that Mr. McKinnon would not be extradited rightly, but Talha and Babar Ahmad would?
Well, obviously, by the time I heard that Gary McKinnon would not be extradited, about which, as you say, I was, in fact, delighted, because it was the right decision. The extradition of Babar Ahmad and Talha Hassan had already taken place some 10 days previously. Babar actually wrote me a letter the day before he got on the plane saying, that in his view he had won the moral victory as we had done all those years ago, because as soon as he had gone, he was confident the law would be changed. So he was right. So I think it's a very sad day. I mean, there are a lot of differences. There are a lot of differences between the case of Gary McKinnon and certainly Babar Ahmad. I know there's a crossover with Talha Hassan because of the Aspergers. But ultimately, Theresa May made the decision on Gary McKinnon not on the basis of forum, but on the basis of medical evidence. And that certainly would never have applied to Babar because there was no medical dispute there. But the cases of Babar Ahmad and Talha Hassan are probably the strongest possible cases that we have yet had in the last 8 years for forum. And so the announcement that the government would now introduce a forum amendment 10 days after they'd put these two men on a plane, I think is shameful, and I think it was utterly political, to be honest. I'm afraid I don't buy the argument that there are double standards here in the way that some people are trying to portray it, and particularly to portray it as a Muslim issue. I don't think that is the case, but I do think that the terrorism, lumping these guys together with Abu Hamza was a very, very specific decision taken by the Home Office, because they knew full
David,
well.
You say you don't accept the arguments that some people are making, that it's something against Muslims. But the way the Muslims are perceiving this, and some of the comments that have come through, is that exactly what you just said there at the end, that Talha Hassan, Babar Ahmad, the Home Secretary, would not separate from Abu Hamza and the other three. So there was this lumping together. Talha's dad was in there saying, like, basically, it was Abu Hamza and the gang that got extradited.
Yeah.
Followed by the timing of this decision. I mean, Talha Hassan also has medical conditions. The Home Office medical specialists have said that he is a suicide risk as well. But none of that was factored in. So from this point of view, the way the events did unfold, it does give that clear message.
Well, it does, but the problem is you've got a confusion, because to my mind, Babar Ahmad and Talha Hassan, theirs was a case of forum. And so the crossover with McKinnon is only with Talha Hassan and the Aspergers and the medical evidence.
Sure.
And I am not well enough versed in the legal aspects of that case to know at what stage and how hard the medical diagnosis was run on him. But McKinnon was not a case of forum. It was purely a case of medical evidence and suicide risk. And so, you can never compare McKinnon, for instance, with Babar Ahmad. You can only compare him with Talha Hassan, and I don't know how strongly that was fought in the legal side, because most of the legal arguments on both Babar Ahmad and Talha Hassan for the last 5 years have been about the whole Supermax stuff. So it may well have got lost in the fog. I just don't know.
Okay, Jeremy, do you want
David, it's good to have you on the programme. Can I just ask a couple of questions for you? I think for the benefit of the viewers, it might be helpful if you explained what forum meant. And secondly, is there any defence for either Talha or Babar in the United States that the threshold for removal from Britain has now changed, and therefore, had they been removed 2 weeks later, well, they wouldn't have been removed? I mean, is there a legal possibility there in the USA?
Well, let me deal with the second one first. The answer is absolutely no, for two different reasons. First of all, the threshold has not yet changed. The government has announced its intention to change it, but it's very clear it would not operate retrospectively. Secondly, and much more importantly, the United States doesn't give a toss how people come into its jurisdiction. They regularly kidnap people from other jurisdictions, so that whether somebody might or might not in the future be extradited on the same circumstances, they don't give a damn. That they, if you go into the United States Attorney's Manual, there's a whole chapter on how to go and kidnap people. So they're very overt about it.
Okay.
With respect to forum, what does it mean? It is basically the ability of a judge during the extradition proceedings here in the UK to determine on all the facts and circumstances of the case whether, in fact, it should better be dealt with in the UK as that of Babar Ahmad and Talha Hassan demonstrably would have been. If they committed any crime, they committed it here.
Absolutely.
Thank you, David, for joining us this evening and giving us your time. Just before I come back to Peter and Jeremy, I'm just going to take a couple more calls, if I may. Who's online? Assalamu alaikum, Ali from London.
Assalamu alaikum, and good evening to your two guests.
Wa alaikum salam. You're on air. Your views, please.
Yeah, what I'm saying is they actually use a double standard simply because for McKinnon, who actually committed a crime and been scot-free, and in fact been paid by the Scotland Yard as well, 60 grand or whatever I've just heard. And the other two, there haven't been any substantial evidence against them, and they have been literally blamed and sent to America. They all are British, white or black, Muslims or non-Muslim, but all three are British, and they should be charged, if there is any, should be charged in Britain, not in America.
Okay, thank you, Ali, for your view. Let's go to our next caller. Assalamu alaikum, Muhammad. Muhammad, assalamu alaikum.
Welcome, salam. Just wanted to mention that it's very informative, the whole discussion that's been taking place. I'm very disappointed with everything that's happened. I really don't know what to say. Very disgusted. I really think the government's actions were totally Islamophobic, especially regarding Talha and McKinnon. However, all that's done now, what can we do to help them?
Okay.
To help those two now that they are in the United States, because as David Bermingham said, I think, that they don't care. That now they're down there, they won't care what they do to them, and I don't think there is much we can do. So you just tell us what we can do.
Okay, Mohammed. Well, several things come in here. I mean, we do want to finish off with what people can do, but just one of the questions that did come in earlier was: is this like a political trade-off? You guys get to give us the 5 Muslims, and you guys can keep the rest. What do you think? Is that likely to have happened in a conversation?
Jeremy, you were just about to say.
I think there may have been a political debate and political discussion about this. I think the problem for Babar and Talha was from a long time back, when the Home Office deliberately conflated 5 individual cases into one, and because Abu Hamza was the best known and had faced judicial process in Britain, it then became Abu Hamza and the gang, as though Babar and Talha were somehow or other acolytes of Abu Hamza. They were not. They were completely different issues. Actually, Abu Hamza did make a medical application on his condition about whether or not he should be sent to the United States, and that was dismissed by the judge, and he was indeed removed. The other point that David made about the USA is a very important one, about the way in which people get into the jurisdiction. I mean, some years ago I was involved in a case of a Mexican-American who was accused of a crime in Chicago, went to Mexico to basically avoid any process. An extradition request was made in Mexico but never concluded because he was hijacked by US agents and kidnapped and smuggled across the border. And that isn't that unusual. So the question now is, the great tradition of civil liberties campaigning in the USA, particularly by the black community, I hope they're going to get behind Babar and Talha and say, hang on, these guys haven't done anything wrong. These guys have not been prosecuted in Britain. So let's get behind them, and maybe that'll begin to change opinions in the USA. Peter,
we're coming to an end. What can people do?
It's very interesting what Jeremy is saying about the United States. Of course, we have a duty as citizens to make sure they're not forgotten on this side of the Atlantic as well. They are British citizens who have been sent to the United States in very questionable circumstances. And it's important that we carry on reminding the government that they are British citizens and they get properly treated in the US. So I hope this issue must not go away.
Okay, thank you very much to you both for joining me. And apologies to all our callers that we could not take your calls. But I think, as Peter mentioned, what we mustn't do is forget that an injustice has been done, and we want those British citizens back in the UK, if they've committed something, to face the trials here. See you soon. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.